Hi, my name is KK, and I would really like to share a word from my heart today. I have been very conflicted and feeling really uncomfortable about the topic of diversity and racism and inclusion, and given light of, I think, a really pivotal shift in our culture and in our country. I think I felt the need to share my experience and share my expertise. I'm not sure what you see when you see me, but I am multiracial. Growing up, the way that we would explain it, or at least have it referenced about us, is that my mom is really dark and mixed of all different types of ethnicities, and my dad is very light and mixed of all different types of ethnicities. And so growing up was quite an interesting experience for me. I have two older sisters, and we really didn't grow up in a home that reflected on the multiculturalness of our upbringing. It just was not something we fixated on. However, we did grow up in a very predominantly Caucasian affluent area, which kind of created a lot of different experiences for me. I think this topic of race, this topic of diversity, has always been something I've shied away from because, to be honest, leaning into it, focusing on it, fixating on it has never really helped me. And what I mean by that is I found that it was easier to find my own way around any bias or difficult decisions or conversations that would need to be had. And even when the topic of concern about my race or something that would make me uncomfortable about the fact that I was different, I found myself kind of more easily than most able to sidestep those issues with one very specific advantage, and that advantage is economic. So it's not shocking that today I sit as a business advisor and consultant to many companies, specifically in the health, fitness, beauty, and wellness industries where I'm a specialist. And I'm one of the, I'm the only person of color that is in this position. So I find myself at this interesting crossroads because once again, I'm put in this really uncomfortable middle position where I feel I may not really have a voice because I'm not, growing up, I was not Black enough for the Black kids and I wasn't white enough for the white kids. And so you kind of find yourself living in this really interesting world of gray. And I learned to embrace that at a really young age. What I think was really important to share is maybe some experiences of mine as it relates to race, as it relates to corruption, to help you to better understand how bias plays a role in our lives. And I'm going to give the ask and the conclusion up front. I am a firm believer that, of course, we've come a long way as a country. I'm also a firm believer we have a long way to go. And I think the covert aspects of bias, I won't even use the word race or racism very much after this, because what I really believe in my heart is that we all carry bias. Myself and anyone who's willing to admit it would tell you that there are times, there's experiences, there's preconceived notions that we work off of that aren't exactly PC. They're not exactly things that we're excited to share. But I think it's important that we acknowledge the bias that lives within us because that's really the only way to move forward. So as much as I think it's really impressive that businesses all over the world are stepping out and sharing their desire to support minority businesses and share that they're excited to welcome new diverse members of their teams and listen to people that they would not have maybe typically listened to about this issue. I find it to be a bit, I'm really trying to choose my words here. I find it to be a bit inconsequential because the real issue that we need to talk about is economic empowerment. You see, I didn't necessarily have the upbringing of a prototypical African American. And I share that to be really transparent so that when you hear my story, you're not going to hear, fortunately, of really difficult, life altering things that happen to me that are irreversible. But I think what you will hear is that even on the spectrum of like not very important and very important, it's meaningful to me. And I think it's important that I share this so that you can have some perspective on perhaps your own bias. And then secondly, that you can figure out what that economic empowerment means to you. Does it mean that you are someone that needs to kind of make better decisions with your life and your finances and your business? Does it mean that you have the ability to kind of empower someone to do the same? Or is it simply for you just awareness at this point and a lot of listening and a lot of soul searching and getting to the point where I think you can be honest about the bias that has either infiltrated your life or your organization's life? And I'm willing to share, I think, simply because I think I have been silent for all of my life. And I think part of that silence has become almost a complicitness about things that happen that are wrong, things that happen that are gray, things that happen that maybe if you vote for one party, you think is one issue, and if you vote for another party, you think is another issue. And I should also really be clear, I don't look left or right when I talk about or think about life's issues. I'm not politically leaning, and I'm not, as you can see, I'm kind of in the middle on everything. So when I share, it really is to give my experience so that perhaps some aspect of my journey can color a really favorable aspect of yours. So growing up really racially ambiguous led for a lot of really interesting experiences. I'm both ashamed and encouraged to tell you that it took the light of recent issues for me to realize how much race has played a role in my life, even when I wasn't focusing on it, even when I was able to kind of circumvent issues that have come up. And some of the easy ways to explain is, given where I grew up and given that I grew up in this very like racially fluid family, realizing that even things that I never realized pertained to race or systemic bias certainly had their hands on my story. And so I can walk you back to, as far back as elementary and middle school, and remembering that so many people had a difficult time understanding how to categorize me at that time. And I can even remember like not knowing what box to check under the category of race for certain things that would come up, like standardized tests and things that would be, sent in from the school. But more importantly, outside of that, where I really struggled was interpersonally. So growing up where I grew up, again, there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. And so I found myself with many interesting experiences that reminded me that I was different. And although I had this ingrained leader inside of me that I was willing to put out there and really push, regardless of who was willing to support it. That's just kind of been who I've been my whole life. And so it's not shocking that I am who I am today. I can certainly remember times that I was made to feel other or different. And it was very clear that different was bad. Different was not favorable. I can tell you that it literally took until this week to realize that I had never gone to a school dance before. I either went alone the few times that I did, or once went with the only other person that looked like me at my school, who took me as a friend because I think we were without a partner to go with that year. And I can't explain very clearly how I know that that is related to being different. But what I can tell you is how many times there were boys that I liked, who liked me back, that it was very clear that there was a mutual attraction. And what would end up happening is the boys would be very clear that it would not be okay with their parents for them to take me on a date, or it would not be something their friends would accept because I don't necessarily live in their neighborhood, even though I live in a neighborhood good enough to go to the school. And one quick time that I could explain to you is this dance that I don't know, I didn't understand it at the time, but it's called a cotillion. And it's almost this rite of passage as you transition from preteen to teen. And in my town, it was a really big deal. All of my friends were going to cotillion and getting these invitations in the mail. And I remembered all of my friends, of course, at this time, did not look like me, and did, however, had the same classes. We had the same academic and extracurricular activities. So I was both an athlete and a scholar. And so we had a lot in common, so much so that I certainly never focused on the fact that my friends and I were different. And they never really focused on the fact that I was different. And so I can remember this dance coming up and one of my friends saying, why haven't you gotten your invitation yet? My mom is on the committee. I can find out if they got it lost in the mail, or we'll send you a new one. I'm sure it got lost in the mail. I'll have my mom send you a new one. And I won't pretend that I know exactly like how things unfolded, but I can definitely tell you that the next time my friend and I had that conversation, it got really awkward. And it became really clear that no invitation was coming for me, and that it was not a mistake, and that there was nothing she or her mom could do about it. And I remember my friend being really uncomfortable about that, like not really knowing. I don't think they knew either what was going on or why. And so it was a very awkward thing to tell, your buddy that you spend all this time with, after school and doing sports, that she was just like you and everyone else who was invited, but she wasn't invited. And there's really only one discernible difference between us at that point. And I remember feeling really ashamed, probably for the first time, about being different. And so much so that I never told my mom. I never told anyone about this experience until the last month, like recently, like this last month. And I'm in my 30s, so that was a really long time ago. And I think I know that I'm quite unique. The way that I've dealt with life has been very survivalist and very pragmatic. And I've been applauded for that in a lot of ways. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's not the common response or posture towards hardships. And although it's really, frankly, it's paid off for me and it's been an amazing experience, there's certainly not been a time where I've had the ability to reflect like I am now. And as I do, I have a bit of a different perspective than maybe I did even 10 years ago. So when I look back at that experience, I can tell you for sure that was directly related to the color of my skin. And yet I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to have my mom, who I knew would have called someone, created a stir, like forced the issue to make sure that I wasn't feeling, outside of the mold of, being amazing. And I think I just remember really being ashamed, which is the word that I would use there, ashamed that different wasn't good. And in this case, different based on the color of your skin was actually something that not everyone thought was important to embrace. Even if it was inconsequential, it had nothing to do with that dance. It just didn't really fit in to what they wanted to portray for that night. So now I'll fast forward and tell you that after the dance, so many people, the circles I ran in middle school, would say, did I see you at Cotillion? Did you go? Like, did I miss you? And I was so ashamed, and a middle schooler, that I'm pretty sure I just kind of like skirted the issue and said something like, oh, I was really busy that weekend, I had plans or something to make it kind of less of an issue and less of a, why wouldn't you have gone? And so I remember that kind of as my first experience in hiding the pain of being different. And then also using that to push myself even further. Because remember, my reaction to hardships is quite unique to the human experience. So just being very honest there, I don't know that that was entirely healthy. I just think that's how I got through. And that's how I was able to kind of become this leader that I wanted to be. And so as an interpersonal story, it just really gives you some clarity on why being different can be really challenging, even if it doesn't relate to losing your life. Or something else that's really extreme. My self-esteem really felt, I think, the blow of feeling other. And then I had to internalize this kind of hidden strength, this tigress that said, you know what? I'm just as good as everyone around me. And if I have to work a little harder and dig a little deeper and prove myself a little bit more, like, I'm good with that. I now recognize that although that worked for me, that's an incredibly difficult thing for someone to do. And I think I am the exception, not the rule. And that's how I would like it to be portrayed. And I think there's this sense of, I'm going to say some words that may be inflammatory here, but sense of tokenism that tends to happen when people think of me as an example. I live a multicultural world even now. Many of my best friends are of all different backgrounds and colors and creeds. And I'm surrounded by people of all different genders, ethnicities, where they grew up. And so sometimes as you're that one friend for them or one person in their life that does not fit the mold of what our culture says about a certain race group or ethnic group, you tend to represent the group one of two ways. And for me, that way was I was this token example of what happens when you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, ignore the inequities around you and just keep charging forward. And that's not always possible. And so this is a really great segue to my second explanation of my experience, which is all about economic empowerment. And that really has been my story. So to put it all up front, the only reason that I'm here today in front of you as a successful woman with, multiple businesses and having a national, really an international platform to speak from is because of economic empowerment. It's not because someone gave me any sort of special treatment. It's not because someone wanted to talk about race in my life. It was because I was fortunate enough to have financial support from my mom and then eventually on my own. So let me give you another example. I'm going to fast forward to high school. Still feels a million years ago. So in high school, I entered high school as a competitive gymnast. I had been doing that since the age of 8. And so again, something very not prototypical for the way that I looked. And I never really realized that was a big deal. When I entered high school, I decided to do cheerleading because it seemed like the best, most, it seemed like the next best step to continuing on my gymnastics interests while doing something that was really kind of applauded and loved, in a school setting. Cheerleading was interesting because I had experience. So I made the squad at a higher level. I had more skills than the other girls, which is really great. There's something called being a flyer. It's the girl that goes up in the air. And being a flyer for so many years prior to that, it was a really natural progression for me to say to the coaches of my cheerleading squad, hey, this is what I can do. I realize that it's pretty advanced for what's happening here on the squad. So I'd be really excited to be considered to be a flyer. And they were really hesitant. I remember a lot of pushback and a lot of kind of not saying something, but saying something. And they finally gave me a shot to show my skill, and it went great. And I was pretty excited about, being able to continue on in that really prominent role. So the flyer, because she's the person you see up in the stunts, it's really, it's a prominent role on the squad. So as we started kind of working more together as a squad, very quickly, they started to take me out of stunts and put me on the ground, helping lift up other girls. So I have to give you some odd facts at this point. I was teeny tiny at that age, and I weighed less than most of the other flyers. Including the flyer that they then started to have me put up as a base. So when you're the girl who's the base, you're the girl on the bottom. It was really painful to lift up a girl that's, 20, maybe even 30 pounds heavier than you. And at some point, I think I got really gutsy, really typical me. And I said to the coaches, I pulled her aside and said, hey, I'm a little confused. I've been a flyer for so long that I thought that I'd be bringing that to the squad, essentially, something along those lines. And I'm wondering, are you going to keep trying me in stunts? And so at this point, I think I had been pushing kind of inadvertently, because that's just who I am. I'm still me. I've always been me. And at this point, she was kind of sick of the pushing of me, kind of trying to get back to flying. And so she spoke really frankly and said, look, you don't look like the other girls. I can't put you in the air. It doesn't look right. Boy, that hurt. She made it really clear that just simply based on the way that I look, it had nothing to do with my skill or my excitement to bring my best to the squad. But simply because I didn't look right in the air, I didn't match the other girls, that it did not suit the needs of what she thought would be appropriate. And I got to tell you, that did not sit well with me. But it also did not reflect race to me. I think I just thought she was not a good person. I don't know that I really sat and simmered on that statement about not looking like the other girls. And instead, I went to my single parent, hardworking mom and said, I want to leave the squad and I want to go do this other type of squad, which is across town. It's considered just as prominent, but it's double the cost. And I remember my mom not even batting an eyelash and was like, I will pick up extra shifts, figure out what you need to get on the squad. I'll make it happen. I look back now, and that was double the cost of my original squad. It was about $5,000 a year just as an annual commitment. What I never even thought about was the inadvertent cost. And I'm not even talking emotional, I'm talking economic. So that squad was across town. It was no longer on my school campus. And my mom worked multiple jobs growing up. So she couldn't pick me up and take me to practice every day. So she would pay for cabs. Goes to show you how the world has changed. But she would leave me money to take a cab to and from practice if she was not able to bring me or pick me up. That's really expensive. And I don't think I ever reflected on the fact that the only way I was able to kind of get from lifting up this girl that was way bigger than me and killing not just my body, but my self-esteem in the process was to use economics in my favor and flip the script. fast forward, I joined this all-star squad, which was amazing. It was super diverse, people from all different parts of town, different colors, different nationalities, really, really good squad. And I was both a captain and a flyer every year. And I had an amazing experience. I actually then became a leader to the younger squad. And so kind of practiced my coaching skills from that young of an age. And so I look at that as a success story, but I also now have to look at it from the lens of race and diversity and lack of inclusion. And I think, oh my gosh, I never realized how economics has helped me, how finances has helped me to kind of step around these issues that could have really decimated me and kind of really killed my self-esteem. And I'm not looking for you to cry or even march or email me your condolences. What I'm asking you to do is look within yourself and evaluate the bias that lies within you. Maybe find some ways to reconcile that, maybe speaking to or learning about the things that you have more preconceived notions about, and being really honest about that, while thinking about how you can contribute to the economic empowerment of people who may not have the benefit that you or I do to step around a difficult situation, to give themselves a hand up through a challenging time. And so I'll leave you with one last story. You know, there's something to be said about college, and I was really lucky. I received a full scholarship to undergraduate school, and actually went on to do my master's and worked for an amazing company that actually helped support the cost of my master's. So I graduated with a bachelor's and a master's completely debt-free, which was an amazing experience that I realize is really precious now. But when I think about college, I again overlooked something that's kind of inherently institutionalized that we don't think about as a culture. So I want to leave you with this concept of systemic or institutionalized bias or racism. And what I want to tell you is that I know it's real because of my personal experiences, because of what we're knowing and seeing today. But I encourage you to look beyond the statistics. I encourage you to look beyond your own personal discomfort with something that may not have affected you for one reason and one reason alone. It's not always easy to quantify the experience that someone has when they're treated differently because of the way they look. And I don't think that looking at the system and the institutional cost of doing that is worth it. I do think focusing on how we can empower with finances, business, understanding education's role can be really powerful. So in college, I was really lucky to get a full academic scholarship, but there was something else that I wasn't privy to that a lot of my friends that I knew growing up were privy to, and it's the concept of being a legacy. And so the concept of being a legacy is that there's this generational power, this generational wealth, this generational understanding of your parents having attended a certain college, and therefore you becoming what we would call a shoo-in to make it into that college, no matter how competitive or how much or little you may fit the mold of what they typically look for. And so I didn't have the luxury of being a legacy. In many communities that are Black and brown, you are the first or one of very few people to go to college. And so you don't necessarily have like alumni connections. But I think that's what I would like to assert and encourage you to think about, is what kind of legacy can you leave, both for yourself, for your family, maybe your children, and maybe your colleagues in the African American or Asian American or Muslim American communities. Like, this is not about one race. It's about having the privilege of being the gold standard, which is amazing, by the way, and not something that I look down on or feel like I have a chip on my shoulder about, but instead I look to the people around me that are Caucasian, and I applaud how many of them have navigated the world. And that legacy, that you've got a friend in me, that I've done this so I can walk you through it, that let me introduce you to someone I know, that, hey, I've got seed funding, that I would like to invest and help you to grow this business that you have, that let me get you in front of the decision maker to hire you type of legacy. It's something we can all do. It's something we can all share in together. And so my ask of you for listening to this very long story and experience of mine is not to look at me or anyone who has gone through systemic and institutionalized bias or racism as someone that you need to shy away from or feel uncomfortable about or pretend like it didn't happen or that it's not real, but instead think about how you can leave a legacy of financial prowess, economic growth, development of skills that are needed for the workforce and for business, and most importantly, the tolerance and understanding that we are more alike than we are different. Let's embrace that for what it is and share our legacy with each other. Thank you so much for listening. If there's something that I said that made you uncomfortable, I'm going to say good, but I'm also going to say feel free to let me know your thoughts. I have never spoken about this issue in my entire life, and I found myself very uncomfortable with everyone now talking about this secret that I've had, this dirty little secret about being different and how racism has played a part in my life. And by the way, those are two very small stories of a much bigger picture. But I really feel the need to give the right perspective about race and corruption, because I believe that this is the legacy that we all want to have our hands in. This is the experience we all want to be able to contribute to. And it's not just sharing, not just patroning, but creating the world we really want to live in together. I'm KK. I'll talk to you soon.